Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on when you are looking at this podcast. This is an ongoing series that we like to call, or not only like to call, do call, Race, Culture, and the Church. Race, Culture, and the Church. I am pleased, I am privileged to have once again, I think you are tied now, Chief, with the most recurring visits here on Race, Culture, and the Church. With,
Who am I tied with?
Dr. David Nystrom with Western Seminary.
Oh, a doctor.
Doctor.
Okay, I'll take it.
That's it's a tall. That's a tall order. So I've got a chief of police and I've got a doctor of history and theology from Western Seminary. Both of you gentlemen are incredible men of God and also provide keen insight into the subject race, culture, and the church. Again, race, culture, and the church. I invite you all to look at our history, our series of podcasts. I think we're approaching 20 now. I invite you to look at those and really dive deep and to look at the arc of conversation that started mostly after the murder of George Floyd. But I invite you to follow along with us. And again, as I just shared, Chief Daniel Hahn, one of 16, only 16 of over 300 chiefs of police for California that is African American. Again, Chief Hahn, thank you for being here. You're a friend. I consider you a friend. You're also someone that I am godly proud of. And as I continue to say, I pray for you. I pray for you. I pray for Chief Hahn. I pray for your family. As they say, there's literally and probably figuratively and probably literally a target on you from those that would that don't want the best for you or from you. So you're in a tough position, dare I say, pastoral position. You've been chief how long now?
It's coming on 4 years here and 6.5 in Roseville, so a little over 10.
So, boy, in dog years, that'd be like 70. That's, yeah. And I'm probably, I won't put words in your mouth, but at times it's got to feel like dog years in terms of not necessarily a lack of joy, but the associated weight of the role, of the responsibility.
Yeah, it wears you down at times.
Yeah. That. So, speaking of being worn down, not even a quarter mile from here. It's nothing new. We're in Oak Park. We're in Oak Park, and there's a lot of transformation that's taken in Oak Park, and you have this conflation of race, culture, economic, the best of times, the worst of times, the disparity, the chasms, just tremendous amount of things going on. And then so there was a shooting and a death on Fifth Avenue, just down the street. So it really brings home the reality. And that Fifth Avenue, leaving here, that's a street I go down all the time. All the time. It's kind of my shortcut to get to the post office. You just never know. You just never know. So I just mentioned that as just kind of a base, just to keep us grounded. But you've been on television quite a bit in general, but of late, since the verdict that was rendered in the trial of Derek Chauvin with the murder of George Floyd, what's your take? I really want to just hear from you. And when I reached out to you, I said, when that was all going down, I said, I need Chief Hahn. So what's your take, Chief?
Yeah, I think it was good to see our system, if you will, our society hold somebody accountable that killed somebody and did something horrible to another human being. But even more so in this case, there's a lot of people that always ask, why does the media, why does society only care when it's a police officer killing somebody? Although I can agree with that a little bit, but I believe it's because with police officers, we put a lot of faith and responsibility. And so this is a man that did this to another human being that represents the same thing that I represent. He doesn't wear the exact same uniform, but he definitely represents the same thing that everybody that wears a police uniform represents. So it's good to see somebody held accountable for that, and I think you saw that in the reaction across the country. We did not see overwhelming number of volatile protests. I think there was some relief for sure. I had some relief when I saw that, but I think the pitfall we could fall into, and I've heard some people talk about this, is that that verdict had more significance than that one incident. The way I look at that verdict is one man. You could say more than one man. The additional folks that were part of that call did something to another man. And to me, that's what it is. And that one man was held accountable.
So you're saying, to put words in your mouth or to paraphrase, don't read more into it than what you see.
I don't know that necessarily changes a whole lot of the challenges that we have, nor goes to the root challenge that we have, but it is one man that was held accountable for doing something to another man. So it's good in that sense. Hopefully it brings some sort of, I don't think it will bring closure, but some peace to the family. But I wouldn't say we're in a terribly more significant, better place now than we were before the verdict.
It can go different ways. With you've opened up a lot that with the verdict, folks may think that, oh, there's some greater awareness on the part of our police officers. That's one. Or there is a greater, I'll say level of accountability is too broad, but that there will always be remedial actions that can be taken in cases of bad actors, if you will. Right during the same day the verdict was coming down, you had another police-involved shooting under questionable circumstances, and then either the next day or the following day, it was with great rapidity. It was like, wow, okay. If anyone was under the assumption that, oh, okay, well, we've turned the corner, we're coming into a new era of enlightenment, just the week after the verdict ought to cause one to like, maybe not.
Yeah, the role we place men and women, just regular human beings in that wear a police uniform is a really tough role. And there are challenging situations on a daily basis that the community and police officers come into contact regarding. So every situation is different. I don't think that there's anybody in their right mind in our country that believes that, just take our department. There's 1,000 plus members of the Sacramento Police Department. I don't think anybody believes that none of those people will do something wrong at some point.
Correct.
I don't think there's anybody that believes that you'll never have any corruption or never have anybody that does something really bad on purpose sometimes out of 1,000 plus people. What I think they expect is when and if that happens, that the organization handles it and holds people accountable, does what they can do to prevent that from happening, and if it does happen, handle it. And so with these other incidents that you talk about, I think the fact that if there's body cameras released, we've seen one of those incidents where the sheriff did not release the body camera at all and only showed the family 20 seconds. That's a challenge because what I hope for is that there's legitimacy in my organization. There's legitimacy in the Sacramento Police Department. There's trust in the police department. So that's not a belief that nobody will do something wrong, that there's no controversial issues. That's a belief that they can trust the organization to fairly look at a situation and fairly determine what's supposed to come. And we don't have that in this country right now. That's why you can have 50 people look at an incident and think that as tragic as it is, it's within the law and within policy. and another 50 people look at that exact same video, that exact same fact pattern, and say it is not within the law and somebody should go to jail. It's because there is a lack of legitimacy in law enforcement organizations and government in general. And we don't really deal with that as a society. We're trying to deal with it in the Sacramento Police Department. But as you mentioned, there was a shooting here in Oak Park the other night. And I think we'll get into this in maybe some of your future questions. We need to deal with this together and holistically because it's much, much larger than just law enforcement.
What do you were mentioning about police officers and word I'll use it, I think you were alluding to fallibility, human, just the human factor. How much grace, how much latitude do you extend? I hear, and this is the reason I'm bringing this up. I hear, well, police officers are called on to make split life and death decisions, split-second decisions, and one set of responses would go along the way of, well, yeah, things happen, it's unfortunate. The other is, well, if you're not capable of making those quick discernments, you need another line of work. I hear you. I do. I hear you. But if grace is extended broadly, I mean, I don't know how many police departments there are across the country, but if there were one associated, one questionable death with each one, then we'd have a mess. We'd have a mess.
The fact that somebody that wears the same uniform I wear or any of the number of other variations of uniforms across our country has a tough job doesn't mean that they are allowed to go outside of their training or what is acceptable. So I really believe as police officers, first of all, we're human beings. So there's nothing supernatural about a person that wears a police uniform. They're human beings. Mm-hmm. And so I've heard in the past, well, on these shootings, if the officer was in fear, he shouldn't be a police officer. Well, that's not realistic. Mm-hmm. Human beings have fear. And so whether you put a uniform on or have a lot of equipment on doesn't mean you're going to be absent fear. But I believe we should be holding police officers to a higher standard because we're one of the few jobs, professions that have the kind of power that we have. We have the power to take your freedom away.
Correct.
And we have the power to take your life away.
Correct.
And with that comes a lot of responsibility. For example, if you look at one of the recent shootings where an officer on the video appears to think that she has a taser
Correct.
instead of a firearm. After a while, I've probably watched the video twice, so I haven't spent too much time watching the video. But it appears to me that, yes, she did believe that she had a taser instead of a firearm. But you know what you can't do? You can't accidentally kill somebody. And so she needs to be held accountable. I do believe it was an accident. And I don't know, maybe she didn't have the proper training or didn't go to the training, and so maybe there's some additional negligence on her part. But even if she didn't, you can't accidentally pull your gun and shoot somebody and kill them thinking it's your taser. Mm-hmm. So she needs to be held accountable. So I wouldn't give people leeway. Police officers have a lot of responsibility and they need to take a lot of care. Now, the other thing that we really have to do is see how we can better equip our officers, see how we can, whether it's better training or, I'm one of those folks that believes that we send officers to things we shouldn't be sending officers to.
Like?
And, well, all sorts of, whether it's a homeless call without any violence or a mental health call without any violence, or any number of things that we ask officers to do, that over the years has just gained the number of things that officers do because other services fall by the wayside because of budgets and bad economies. So just give it to the officers, because the one thing that everybody knows about the police is they know what 911 is, and they know they will get a relatively quick response. And there's nothing really else in our society, other than maybe pastors, that you get that kind of response. And so more and more things have been piled onto police officers,
Yeah.
and I think we're seeing some of the result of that in addition to history and some of the other things.
It's interesting that even while George, for the 9+ minutes that George Floyd was being killed, the folks that were witnessing this were calling 911 and police officers for help. So it's like, how ironic. And that it goes to your point about bad actors. Look at the individual, look at the situation, hold that person accountable. So I'll ask, I'll just go there. Reform as a word, just as a word, what does that mean to Chief Daniel Hahn? And then the follow-on is what that word might mean lived out if applied to Sacramento PD.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine who is a really, really smart, knowledgeable.
I thought that was you.
No,
You're the chief of police.
no, who runs the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley, John Powell. And amazing resource for research and other things. But one of the things he said to me a few years ago is that he no longer uses the word racist because it evokes so much emotion that the conversation gets shut down. So when he says that word, there's no more conversation, right? So he says he doesn't use that. So I don't think the word reform is quite to that point yet, but I think it's rapidly going there. There's so many different perceptions of what that means to each person that it's almost hard to have a conversation about reform. I don't know what other word you would use.
That's why I asked for your definition. I wasn't going to posit one.
But
I was just, okay, reform means this. No, what does, okay, let's not use reform. What does positive change look like? And what does it look like for the Sac PD?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I don't mind talking about reform either, but
It's a loaded word.
it is.
I totally.
It's more loaded every day with different definitions.
Absolutely.
But, I hate to say this, but I still have hope. I have not lost all hope. I'm a very hopeful person. But I worry because, in my opinion, we never really talk about and deal with what could bring real reform or positive change. And that's because these issues are so intertwined, and we try to simplify them so much that we end up doing really nothing. And that's why we continue to have this challenge hundreds and hundreds of years later. And, you look at protests from the early 1900s and the 1800s, they're talking about the exact, and I don't mean in the same ballpark, I mean the exact same things we talk about and protest about today. And by that I mean, poverty is a large driver of all sorts of things, health issues, crime, dream attainment, if you will, hope. Poverty has a tendency to destroy hope in certain cases. And so then we look where all these shootings occur. You look where George Floyd's incident occurs, and they're in neighborhoods that are pockets of poverty. And it's driven by history and current day, whether they're laws, ordinances, housing ordinances, zoning codes. I was just about an hour ago, talking to some friends over lunch, and they were talking about how a certain area in our city has an abundance of liquor stores. And I said, look in some of the more affluent areas. Do you see any liquor stores? Not like we see in those other. I go, because they're not allowed in those neighborhoods because the zoning does not allow them. The zoning only allows them in that neighborhood. And so when we talk about these things, if all we talk about is law enforcement reform, and most of the time we talk about accountability when it comes to law enforcement reform. And although accountability is critical, no doubt about it, and we need to continually get as good as we possibly can at accountability. But I personally think we need to spend some time, if not more time, on preventing it from happening in the first place, so then you don't have to have accountability.
So let me ask you, Chief, do you see your role and your department's role, if society is a train, do you see yourself as the caboose with many cars and an engine ahead of you? Do you see yourself in the middle? I suspect you don't see yourself as the engine driving the conversation.
Well, I'd actually say right now in my current role, with my current, I guess you could say, platform, I would say I would consider myself at least close to the engine.
Okay.
Because, first of all, if I show up in this uniform, people pay attention.
Correct.
Now, it might be bad attention, could be good attention, but they're going to pay attention.
Correct.
And right now, as you mentioned, I've been on TV a few times. So that's a moment in time or a period of time where if I talk about the real issues and I talk about it in a way that people can understand it, that all people can understand it, all people can digest it, and at least think about it after the conversation is over, I think we could start steering this to the things that will change it permanently, the things that is rooted in history and bias and rules and laws that are so much larger than just law enforcement. Do we need to deal with law enforcement? Absolutely, and we're trying to do that. But if all we do is try to say, well, if we fix law enforcement, this will be solved. Because partly, as long as it's in society, as long as it's in our society, whether it's biases or other things, then it will be in the police department because we're part of society. We hire from society. We hire human beings.
Correct.
And those human beings come from our community, come from our society. And so if there's biases in society, there's biases in the police department. And so a lot of times what we talk about is there racism in law enforcement? Is there Klan members in law enforcement? Are there Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and those hate groups or white supremacist groups in law enforcement? Well, we test for that in our backgrounds. We ask that on the polygraph test. We look at people's social media and we talk to people that are outside their friend group. And so I think we do a really good job to try to determine if that and other things are part of this individual that we want to provide all this power to. But there's no doubt historically that there was full-blown, blatant racism, white supremacy, open racism, open white supremacy in law enforcement. Sure. So we have to realize that wasn't that long ago. That was into the 60s and 70s where people were openly members of the Klan and police officers. Jim Clark on Bloody Sunday in the mid-60s wore a pin on his uniform every single day that said never. Never allow an end to segregation, never allow voting rights, never, never, never. And he was the top law enforcement official in that whole county, and he wore it on his shirt. So you imagine if you live in Selma, Alabama in the 60s, do you think law enforcement is fair? No, you're staring at somebody that doesn't think you're equal to him every single day, and he's not scared to tell it, and he kept getting elected. So it's at least in our not too distant past, at the very least. So we have to acknowledge that, and we have to add into our training and our culture and just all things that go into that, these historical facts and how they play out current day, in addition to, I don't care what profession you are, even in the church, I'm sure. Anybody that has a tremendous amount of power, you have to consciously go about things and include and try to ensure that in your culture is this kind of humble gene. Because you can get a little out of control. Correct. If you don't consciously acknowledge abundance of power can change people and can change how people act. And you have to consciously fight against that in any organization.
You must have been ear hustling a conversation I was having with one of our advisory council about an hour and a half ago along those very lines. You're absolutely right. Let me ask, so I appreciate your forthrightness and just being who you are. Is Chief Hahn, where do you stand, or how would I gauge the police, SAC PD? That's all I care about right now, SAC PD. Is your position, your opinion, widely held, mostly held. Few people think like I do. They always say, whoever they are, that a leader reflects the community they lead. You've been there 4.5 years, so you still have a ways to go. Don't plan on retiring, I hope. So where is yours a widely held position, in your opinion?
Well, again, we have 1,000 members, so there's, 500 different opinions within the police department.
Or I'd say you have 1,000 members, you probably have 2,000 opinions.
That could be too. Yes, yes. I think on one hand, I think the Sacramento Police Department has always been, in certain ways, a very progressive department, whether it's technology or some of those other things. What I have focused on in my time here, one of the main focuses, as I mentioned in my swearing-in speech, is I want to change what has never changed for 200-300 years. And I want to permanently change it. I want to get us to a better place. So on one hand, our officers don't have to stand on volatile protest lines every week where bottles and rocks and expletives are yelled at them and thrown at them, and liquids, like a few weeks ago, are thrown on them, and their families have to worry about what that liquid is and all that. At the same time, I don't want our communities to be in fear of those very police officers in certain segments of our community. We have a city, just like every other city across this country, that I don't know what the percentage is off the top of my head, but just say 50% of the people think that they fully trust the police department and the officers are great and they're here to help, and the other 50% don't. Mm-hmm. They don't. That's not healthy for any city. So I think as an organization, when you start addressing these things, and you talk about, you're a pastor, you think wars have been fought over religion. Mm-hmm. Wars continue to be fought over religion. Right. And what do they always say, not to speak about at your Thanksgiving dinner, don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics. Yep. And I would add race into that, issue, or the current state of race and difference in our country, and the challenges that are right. That's the root of some of the challenges that we're facing today. But we talk about that in the police department. So those conversations are oftentimes tense. And you can see some people aren't buying in. Just yesterday, Thursday, all of our officers go through a 40-hour course every year. It's like teachers have to go to training every year to maintain their
continuing education.
Yeah, so we call it CPT, continual professional training. So our officers have to do 40 hours every year. So this year, as part of that training, I teach a history class. Mm-hmm. And it's a history of our department, of racial history, of California, of the country, things that nobody has ever been taught before because our schools don't teach it, our colleges don't teach it.
And no doubt very uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I tie it to certain things that are happening today, or certain comments that a police chief made, or some incident, and I'm like, that sounds just like this thing that happened back during slavery times, right? And so those conversations sometimes are hard, and sometimes the feedback in those conversations are pretty direct. But, I liken it to kind of like how I was, and everybody has their subject in school. Math was mine, right? English, no way. Math, right? You're either one or the other usually. But, I think of some of the things in college in math or in my business classes that I remember are the ones that were repeated over and over and over, right? I didn't get it till the 10th time I heard it. I didn't understand what my mom kept teaching me until the 10th time she whooped me or did something, right? So I look at this as the same way. Some people are already there, and when it's spoken, they're like, that explains what I've been thinking about already, and I'm on board, and I understand it. Some people are, because it's totally opposite of what they've been taught their whole life, that, I'm not, one of the things I talk about is what the Civil War was fought over. And so some people think like that was a really long time ago. Like I wasn't alive. What's that got to do with today? And that's why I tie it to things today. And I'm like, you have to understand the Civil War was not fought over the abolition of slavery. No. It just wasn't. No. But most people think it was. And I'm like, no, it was fought over the expansion of slavery. And most people think that Abraham Lincoln, we lift him up as this person that freed the slaves. Well, I guess technically he freed the slaves, but he did not think black people were equal. Right. And so even then, because it's so contrary to what we've all been taught our entire life, even in secondary education, I actually read portion of his speech where he says black people are inferior. Right. He literally says it in his speech when he's running for Congress against Stephen A. Douglas. And so when you start piling it on top like that, and they're like, I'm reading his speech word for word. Like, this isn't my opinion. I'm reading what he said in 1858. And so people start coming, oh, and I'm like, okay, so what does that have to do with today? We were brainwashed that certain people were not equal. Right. We were brainwashed that certain people were violent. And we still think those things today, right, if we really want to dig into our subconscious. We had boarding schools for Native Americans that we said the goal was to civilize them. Well, if we have to civilize you, what does that mean you are right now?
Savages.
We thought black people were savages. Mm-hmm. We repatriated almost 2 million Mexican and Mexican Americans back to Mexico, and part of the reason was we thought they were disease-ridden because of their race. Like, these things happen in this country. And so in this country, we have groups of people, and I have no doubt that not all of them went there with that intention, but clearly some of them did, that break into the U.S. Capitol, and they go, some groups, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and others, and they clearly said, at least verbally, that they wanted to kill people. People did die. They erected a noose outside, said they wanted to hang some of our elected officials. Mm-hmm. And we have large segments of our country that still to this day call them patriots and excuse that sort of behavior. Yet we have somebody like a Colin Kaepernick that takes a knee during the national anthem, didn't hurt anybody, said he loved this country, said he loved the flag, and was protesting me, basically, protesting law enforcement, and we call him unpatriotic. Mm-hmm. And we say these acts at the Capitol were like third world country. Like, I heard nationally elected leaders, congressmen say, stop acting like Afghanistan, stop acting like the third world country. And that's an easy way for us to get this off of our back and put it somewhere else. Correct. But the reality is, what happened on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol was America. Correct. That was Americans. That wasn't Afghanistan. That wasn't some other. That was us.
So to that end, that's us. You're painting a pretty heavy lift when it comes to transformation.
It's even heavier when we don't address it at all.
Well said. Very well said. Touche. I want to play a little bit of time left. I want to play a little word association. And so whatever pops into your head, I'll say a word or two and give me your take on that as it applies to race, culture, the church, SAC PD, education.
On one hand, education is key, and it doesn't mean formal education. But I believe now more than I ever have before, after all the historical research I continue to do, what education we provide the masses is key. And we have told a lot of lies and left a lot of things out that I believe is directly responsible for the challenges we have today.
Economic inequality.
Probably the primary reason why we still struggle to this day. If we don't address that, we won't move very far.
How prepared, I'm gonna break my game right now and that follow up. How prepared should we be to address that?
I don't even actually think it's that hard. So if you take Oak Park, where we sit right now, where I grew up and where you have so graciously, and I'm so proud that you have plopped down your church in a community that I used to be in this church, right, in the summer Bible school. If you look at the history of Oak Park was the first suburb of Sacramento.
Yes,
it was wealthy. It was all white, had a full-blown amusement park in McClatchy Park called Funland. Had 4 of the 7 rail cars end here in Oak Park because this was a destination place. Thriving business districts. Thriving business district on Stockton, on 35th Street, on Broadway. And what changed that was not people being lazy and just need to get a job. What changed that was not just the fact that black people started moving into the neighborhood. The reason black people moved into Oak Park was because they were kicked out of the redlined area for urban renewal downtown.
Correct.
And this was one of the very few neighborhoods that they could live in all of Sacramento, because Land Park, Curtis Park, East Sac, and River Park didn't allow black people to live there, period. Reinforced by the federal government, state government, and local government. And the other reason, the primary reason Oak Park changed, is we built Highway 99. And the purpose of Highway 99 was to take people from the outskirts of town to the newly renovated business district, i.e. tax dollars, to downtown, killing the economic vitality of Oak Park, to have Oak Park become what it was when I lived here. And what that means is we created Oak Park. We created the violence. We created the poverty. We created the lesser than education. And if we created it, we can fix it. And so, we're honest on this. So what I see in Sacramento is the same thing I see across this country. And of course, I know Sacramento issues way better because I live here. Mm-hmm. But economic development for us in neighborhoods like Meadowview or Del Paso Heights, economic development in those neighborhoods is $50,000, $100,000 to a nonprofit that oftentimes, like the City of Refuge here in Oak Park, does amazing work and saves individual lives. Truly do. They do amazing work. They do not change a whole neighborhood.
Correct.
Economic development in an upper middle class neighborhood is an aquatic center where, as I know all too well as I travel around the country for my daughter's sports, well, if we're going to Denver for a volleyball tournament or Las Vegas for a soccer tournament, what do we have to do while we're there? We have to get a hotel room. And we typically get it close to the venue where they're playing because we want to walk there. We don't want to get a rental car. What do we have to do? Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We have to go buy food at a restaurant. So facilities like that lift everything around them, creates business opportunities around them, makes the restaurants more profitable, makes the hotels more profitable. Or if we put a zoo somewhere, where do we put that? Do we put it in a neighborhood that needs help lifting up? Or do we put it in a neighborhood that that's already up there? Well, we in Sacramento across this country, that's exactly what we do. We put the millions and millions of dollars investments into facilities that or things that lift all boats in those neighborhoods. We do a lot smaller investments that lift individuals through great nonprofit organizations into communities like Meadowview. And we've got to stop doing that. Mm-hmm. And if we are going to, and so we are left, if you go around and really dig into people's brains and ask them, why is Oak Park the way it is? They know nothing about the history we just talked about. Mm-hmm. They will say, well, if those people just get a job, then they won't be killing each other.
Whoever those people are.
Yeah. And as opposed to, the truth is, are there lazy people in Oak Park? Of course there are. There are lazy people in every neighborhood. There's lazy people in every profession. Mm-hmm. So it's not because Oak Park Oak Park's actually rebounding now because of private investment, really. Mm-hmm. But Meadowview's not. Mm-hmm. Del Paso Heights is not. So those neighborhoods, Del Paso Heights, same story as Oak Park. Del Paso Boulevard was the heaviest traveled intercontinental roadway in the country, and a thriving business. And if you talk to the OGs in Del Paso Heights that are in their 70s or so that were around then, they will tell you Del Paso Boulevard was the place to be.
Woodlake was the neighborhood, much like Oak Park in the day. It was. So I've got one more association, but before I forget, when are you running for mayor? I'm just asking. That's all I'm doing.
Let me be clear. Never.
Don't ever say never. Chief Hahn, you were everything you articulated. I could only say amen. Gosh, I wish we had more time. I know I'm out of time. The church. Word association again, the church. Where do you see the church, however you define the church?
I think the church is critical and can do more. I think there's a lot of people that have, over the years, probably starting after my childhood or gaining steam after my childhood, have grown disillusioned with the church, with maybe the rules or the standards or those sort of things in the church. And I just look at throughout history, what were the seminal moments in history where significant change occurred, and lives were improved because of that change. And most of those, I see the church was involved in some form or fashion, in some cases heavily involved, and how they went about it. And so I think churches can get back to that and get more involved and have more influence. I mean, I look at the same thing with like sports and athletes. You know, we often tell athletes to shut up and play now.
Correct. Just shut up and dribble.
But if you look at history, you think of Muhammad Ali, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jim Brown, Bill Russell, all those folks supported Muhammad Ali when he made his. They all had press. They weren't shutting up and playing. We act like this is a new thing because we don't know our history, and we see what change came about in the '60s and those times. And I think, you know, leadership is a little bit different now than it was back then. But I still see amazing people that have the ability to do what they do, and you know, both through my profession in the last 33 years of being a police officer and growing up here, some of the people that we would I guess you could consider throwaways in our society, the people we lock up for long periods of time, and that's just them over there. You change one thing in their life growing up. You just change one thing, and they are probably the most amazing leaders that we've ever seen. I look at myself. If my mom hadn't adopted me, my life would be so much different. If she wasn't who she was and adopted me. So I look at some of my friends that fell by the wayside, went to prison or were killed. I'm like, if they had my mom, they'd be me. And if I was them, I'd be them. And so if that's the case, we could do a whole lot of good if we just be like my mom, I guess you could say.
I reflect on that quite often. The grace of God that I had the parents that I did. That's just. Because
you didn't pick them, did you?
I did not pick them. I did, and I'm surprised they picked me. I'm eighth in the litter of 9, and so I'm surprised that I was even coming along. I have just two more questions rolled into one. So all told, again, and obviously, I encourage everyone to follow our podcast, Race, Culture in the Church. Race, Culture in the Church. So, Chief Hahn, what would you, on the side of a lot of patrol cars, they always have the little slogans. Typically, it's to serve and to protect. To serve and to protect. So, what would you, if you were ascribing a grade to SAC PD on the service and on the protection, what grades would you give?
I'd probably give us a C on everything because at the core of, no matter what words you want to use or what statement you want to give, at the core of that is legitimacy and trust. And the protests, the anger on just a regular call that our officers experience in certain segments of our community are proof that people don't have that trust and there isn't that legitimacy in the police department, at least to the extent that I think we could be, can be, and eventually will be. And whether it's rooted in truth and fact, the fact that people don't trust us, or it's based on a bunch of things that aren't truthful or fact, the end result is they don't have trust. And anytime that is the case, we need to address it. So I will give us an A on effort in terms of addressing this and addressing, it's much easier to just address equipment and policy. It's much harder to have these conversations on history and bias and open up your department to other people to come in and look at that when you know the answer and the result of that study is going to be negative. And you know you're gonna basically get kicked in the teeth but you do it anyway, because at the end of that, there's some short-term pain for some long-term gain. And this department is doing that. So I'll give us a C of where we're at right now, but I would give us an A for our effort. And hopefully that A for effort will rise that C in reality.
And I would give you an A for being so kind to continue to come here to answer the questions that I believe a lot of folks in my position and others are wanting to ask, and you are very candid in your answering. And so, Chief Hahn, again, both me, my wife, City Church of Sacramento, we're praying for you. We're praying for your wife and for your children. God continue to protect you and continue to be a benefit as Chief of Police to Sacramento and to our community. So thank you very much for joining us again. And again, I encourage you to go to look at all of our podcasts, Race, Culture, and the Church. Thank you, Chief Hahn.
Thank you for having me.